Dear ladies and gentlemen, participants, good afternoon, and as we say in our Dushi English Papimentu, bon tardi. My name is Reinald Martis. I will be your moderator today, and welcome to day 3 of our SDG Action Week for Curaçao. This afternoon, we're going to elaborate on the first SDG, namely SDG 1, no poverty and poverty in all its forms from everywhere. It's also one of the priority SDGs for Curaçao. Just a quick reminder, we have the SDGs, SDG 1, 3, 4, 7, 8, and 4. Our speakers today are both local and international. We will be looking at poverty from various perspectives, as so-called multidimensional perspective. But we will also take an in-depth look at some key data and indicators regarding poverty for Curaçao. So, our first speaker today is Mr. Eduardo Ortiz Juarez. Eduardo is an economist at the King's College London and a research associate at the Commitment to Equity Institute with a particular interest in the study of poverty, inequalities, human and social and fiscal policies. Prior to that, he was a non-resident fellow at the Center for Inter-American Policy and Research at the Tulane University and worked as senior economist at the Latin America and Caribbean Bureau, United Nations Development Program in New York. He has done consultancy work for several organizations and national governments, including the World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, the United Nations, University World Institute of Development Economics Research, and if I may add, also for the government of Cuba. He has also served as Deputy Director of Economic Analysis at the Mexican Ministry for Social Development. His research has been published in peer-reviewed journals, and collective volumes and reports have been cited over 1,400 times. Description of his presentation. The presentation focused on the methodological criteria and results of estimates of the potential impact of COVID-19 on changes in national income-based poverty, income inequality, and on socioeconomic stratification through the contraction of labor income for those individuals potentially affected by social distancing measures put in place to contain and delay the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. 3 simulation scenarios are developed, and their impacts on poverty headcount rates are estimated for both the official poverty line and the international poverty thresholds that classify individuals into destitution, extreme poverty, moderate poverty, vulnerability to poverty, middle class, and upper class. Estimates of short-run downward mobility and changes in unemployment rates are also discussed. Ladies and gentlemen and virtual participants, I give to you Mr. Eduardo Ortiz Juarez. Yes, we can hear you fine, Eduardo.
in Curaçao. So I would like to present, to discuss, to share with you some methodological criteria given the available information that we had, some potential results from these exercises, and I will conclude with some, even though some of the results could be could look a bit negative, I think there is a final note of optimism, given that some of the strategies that the government has been taking has been implementing could significantly ameliorate the negative impacts of these necessary measures to contain the spread of the virus. So let me start. If we move to the next slide, please, with a bit of context. Yes, as I was saying, the government implemented a series of measures. And so the idea is to estimate what is the effect on the different measures of income-based poverty using both the national poverty lines and also the international criteria to classify individuals into poverty, extreme poverty, total poverty, the so-called vulnerable population, which we refer to as those individuals who are no longer poor, but who are not necessarily living in an economically secure situation. Those are called the vulnerable, and the middle class, using these international standards that we typically use for comparisons across Latin American countries. And income inequality, and we implemented this under three different scenarios on the impacts on poverty. Next, please. Next, please. So I will start first with some methodological issues. I won't discuss with much detail the technical decisions, just for you to have a broad sense of what we did. So we are basing the analysis on the labor force survey, which is representative of almost this is a round number, 160,000 individuals. It's representative of the total population, which is around 158,000 individuals. And we combine this labor force survey with the official registration that the government launched online for those individuals who were since May 15, those individuals who were suffering the loss of income or the loss of jobs because of these measures to contain the spread of the virus. So we combine the characteristics of the labor force survey and the characteristics and the number of individuals registered in this unemployment registration in order to simulate different impacts, right? And we are not focusing only on workers, typical workers, but also on around 2,700 small business owners that have observed an income loss at least until the end of April. I would like to add that this is an ongoing project. The results that I am discussing today with you are based on these data sets, but we are running a new estimation using the most recent labor force survey and an updated registration of unemployment and small business owners. So probably some of these results that I will share with you today will be different in the next version, but still these results are quite useful as they will provide an order of magnitude that won't necessarily change in the new version, right? And perhaps the more important result is for you to have a sense of what is the potential effect and how this effect could be significantly diminished by implementing some very important measures. So the next, please. Of course, there are some limitations, right? We cannot simulate, we cannot take into account into the analysis what are the household responses to this crisis, right? It could be the case that members in a given household could, for instance, children, some members that were out of the labor force, Then when the household experiences a sudden drop in incomes, probably they could start making decisions to send some children, some other members who were out of the labor force to look for some sort of income, right? So we are not modeling those potential household decisions and responses. We are just modeling the sudden drop given this external shock, given the pandemic, and the result after the government action, right? And these are the potential effects. But of course, the pandemic and all these measures imply different impacts in several dimensions of well-being. It's not only the loss of income, and it is not only the loss of employment and the potential increase in poverty, in income-based poverty. It is, of course, and this is the topic of this session, it could imply, of course, several losses in terms of multidimensional indicators, in terms of health, in terms of education, mainly human capital accumulation. I mean, with schools closing for this during this time, there is an important risk that the population as a whole experience an interruption in human capital accumulation that could have a long-lasting consequence. We are not modeling that. We are just focusing on income-based poverty and inequality. So these are the limitations, but the analysis has the advantage of simulating the analysis across the whole population using the labor force survey, which is representative of the whole population, and therefore we are including effects on inequality. We are not just modeling the change in income, but we are modeling the different effects that the crisis could have across the whole income distribution. So this analysis is important in that regard, and it is different from other type of analysis that have been published elsewhere in other countries that have been attempting just to capture the effect on poverty, but assuming that inequality won't change. So in the case of Curaçao, in this exercise, we are modeling both the growth or degrowth effect in incomes and the redistribution of those changes. Okay, the next one, please. So in methodological terms, and this is these are the steps that I won't discuss in much detail. Basically, what we do is we take the unemployment registry that the government launched, and we identify a profile of the population that has been losing their jobs according to the information in that registry, right? So what we do is we replicate that profile in the labor force survey in order to have a very similar set of the population that satisfy that profile, the profile of those who lost their job. So what we do is we implement an individual level matching in order to create a subsample of the relevant population at risk of losing their jobs and their incomes in the household survey, and we run a probabilistic model using that subsample in order for us to estimate the probability that an individual with those characteristics that we observed in the unemployment registry, the probability that an individual like those lose his or her job and their incomes. Okay, so the next one, please. And the next one, I will omit this. This is the probabilistic model. I'm just adding this information for you to have it, the complete information, but I won't discuss that. So, what we okay. What we do with this subsample of, with these probabilities of unemployment or of losing their incomes, given this profile in the social registry, what we do in the labor force survey is, for those individuals with the highest probability of loss of income loss or job loss, we assume that these observations match the total number of individuals already registered in the registry. And for those individuals, we take several decisions. We assume either that their income went from any given value to zero, declined from any given value to zero, and therefore they lost their job. And for other individuals with other high probabilities, we assume that they don't lose their jobs, but they experience a drop in their incomes. So based on these decisions that I will discuss in a bit, what we do is basically we create 3 different scenarios of unemployment and income loss. And by definition, those scenarios provide us with 3 different income distributions. If you take the labor force survey as it is, and observe the income of all the workers there, that means you have an income distribution, the original income distribution. Okay? Based on the different modelings that we were implementing, we now have 3 different distributions modified from the original, right? And those different distributions allow us to construct measurement of poverty or inequality and observe the changes vis-a-vis the original distribution, vis-a-vis the pre-crisis distribution, right? And for those individuals, we also model, we also simulate the government response that the government announced through cash compensations to individuals who have lost their jobs. So on one hand, we simulate the effect of the shock without any response from the government, and then we simulate or we add the government response in order to obtain the net effect, the net potential effect of the crisis. Okay. These policies from the government, of course, have the intention to mitigate the adverse effect of the crisis. And at the end, we will observe that some of these measures are, the results or the impacts of these measures are quite positive, especially at the bottom of the income distribution. That means especially on the poorest of the poor, these measures are proven to be quite efficient. So the next, please. So the first scenario, what we are doing is, as I said, we are taking the individual with the highest probability, and we are moving from that highest probability of the risk of losing their job. Those individuals with the highest probability, yes, we are moving from there up to, we're moving from there downwards up to the point of filling the quota of observations in the labor force survey that matches the total amount of individuals registered in the government registry of unemployment. For business, for small business owners, given that we don't have that much information in terms of who they are, in terms of gender, where they live, what are the main characteristics, but we know that some small business owners were closing business, were experiencing a sudden drop in incomes. For them, we implement a random selection so that we select 44%. We choose the observation that represents around 44% of the total small business owners that were according to the official records, that were experiencing a drop in incomes. So for these individuals who are matched in the labor force, and for the small business owners, we assume in the first scenario that they experience an income loss of 0. So we are considering that in the short term, they are experiencing an income loss of 0, basically. So their income in the labor force survey changed from any given positive number to 0 in the short term. The next slide, please. In the second scenario, we keep the first decision as in the first scenario, but we also add some possibilities that there are around 20,000 individuals who didn't lose their job, but who are experiencing a cut in the hours worked, which translates up to an income loss. They are not losing their job, but they are losing income. So in this second scenario, we won't observe any addition of unemployment, but we will observe some changes in terms of poverty when we measure poverty using this reduced income. What are the income losses that we are modeling? We are modeling different amounts up to the point of 76% in their labor incomes, which is the amount that the International Labour Organization estimated around March, around April, that individuals in middle and upper middle income countries and high income countries, workers in these countries would experience a loss of up to 76% of their labor income. And this doesn't mean that they lose their job. Again, they keep employed according to, this changes from country to country. Some countries have some schemes, some furloughs, etc., etc. So we're assuming that in Curacao, not all these individuals lose their job, just they remain employed, but they lost their a share in their incomes. And the next slide, please. In the third scenario, what we did is we assume, we proceed exactly as in the first scenario. That is, those individuals that are registered and that we identified in the labor force survey, the workers and the small business owners for whom we assume that they have an income of 0 now, that is, in the first scenario, around 5,000 individuals. In the third scenario, we are assuming a very extreme possibility. A worst case scenario, for instance, from an extended lockdown or repeated lockdowns given future waves of the pandemic, etc., etc. So we are just moving between what we have already observed in the registry and an extreme, depending on the time that this pandemic could be with us. So in the extreme case, we are modeling that an additional, that as much as 10,000 individuals could lose their jobs. Remember, again, in the first scenario was 5,000 as those were registered in this online registry, and it could reach up to 10,000 individuals as an extreme case. Okay, what happened with the results? Please, the next one. Okay. Sorry, before the results. So these are the 3 basic scenarios of simulation. So we compute the effect of this pandemic according to the different scenarios in terms of inequality and in terms of poverty indicators, right? After that, as I mentioned at the beginning, we will simulate the mitigating effect of the government policies. What policies are we simulating? We are simulating two different public transfers that were announced in the previous months. A maximum of 1,000 per month as unemployment benefit to those individuals who lost their jobs. And the amounts were simulated as they were announced. That is, those who earned previously to the in the pre-crisis time, those who were earning above 1,000 per month, they will receive that maximum compensation of 1,000 per month. And those who were earning less than 1,000 per month before the crisis, they will receive that specific amount. Okay? And this is for workers. For small business owners, it was simulated a compensation of around 1,350 per month to those business owners who requested such compensation. So, in the first, as a first set of results, we will model the effect of the crisis across these three different scenarios, and then we will simulate the net effect after accounting for the intervention of the government policies. The next one, please. Yes, I mean, with this simulated distribution, as I said, we will simulate the different indicators of poverty, inequality, and the different stratifications according to the international thresholds to classify vulnerability and middle class. And we will do this in each of the three different scenarios, with and without policy interventions. Okay, the next one for the results. What are the potential effects in terms of unemployment? So according to the results and according to the different robustness checks that we run, the effect of the crisis, the immediate effect, and this is important to remember, right? Once the economy shut down, because we have to do that in order to stop the spread of the virus, the immediate effect of that could mean a sudden drop of employment or a sudden increase in unemployment rates. And that doesn't mean that those rates will keep unchanged in the long or in the medium term. Of course, once the economy reopens and the activity starts going back to normal, we will observe, of course, a movement back or towards the pre-crisis levels, hopefully. It is important to highlight that these results are the sudden, the immediate effects in the short term once and while the economy has been shut down. So, in terms of employment rates, the crisis under the first and the second scenario, the crisis would imply an increase of the unemployment rate of around 9 percentage points. This is an important increase. Given the amount of the around 5,000 individuals who were already registered or who already reported as losing their jobs during March and April, right? That was translated in an unemployment increase of around 9 percentage points. And in the worst case scenario, assuming an extended lockdown or repeated waves and more lockdowns in the future, if the affected individuals was equivalent to 10,000, that could mean an increase of around 14 percentage points relative to the pre-crisis levels. You will see two colors here. What are on one hand, we have we are dividing the increase between those who are workers, and the red ones indicates the small business owners who had experienced this sudden drop in incomes. Okay, the next one, please. What is the effect of this in terms of poverty? So, sorry. Using the official poverty lines, you're familiar with these poverty lines based on equivalence scales, etc., according to the type of the family. So we are computing official poverty for both at the household level and an approximation at the individual level. Okay, so in the first scenario, in which 5,000 individuals have reported unemployment and drop in income, the increase in poverty could reach around 7 percentage points relative to the pre-crisis level. And in individual terms, the poverty could increase up to 5 percentage points. Again, all these increases are relative to the pre-crisis levels. In the second scenario, in which we keep the 5,000 individuals unemployed, those registered. But remember, in the second scenario, we are assuming that there are many more individuals who remain employed, but they have experienced a decrease in their income levels, right? At least for the time that the economy has been shut down. In that case, the combination between unemployment and income loss could reach an increase in poverty of up to around 15 percentage points, or 14 points at the individual level and around 16 points at the household level. And in the worst case scenario, which are the third set of bars, that means no loss in income for those who remain employed. We are just using the same set of assumptions in the first scenario. That is, we are assuming that up to 10,000 individuals experience a decline in income of reaching up to 0, okay? And in that case, the increase in poverty could reach up to 9 percentage points at the individual level and 11 points at the household level. The next one, please. And I am about to finish. In this, what happened once we take into account the compensating measures from the government?
I get finished?
No, please, 5 more minutes. Can I have 5 more minutes?
Yes, Eduardo. Yes, thank you. Our time is almost up. Can you do it in 3?
Okay. Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Once we control for the compensating measures, we can observe again that poverty increase in the first scenario, right? Taking into account the 5,000 individuals as unemployed, we still experience an increase in the poverty rates, but it is a significantly lower effect. And this is clearer in the next slide. Please, the next one, because this is very important. The next one, please. Okay, this is in terms of income inequality. Income inequality could increase a bit. This is not a dramatic increase. We are moving from around 0.42 up to 0.47 in one of the worst cases scenarios, but still the sudden increase in inequality could be importantly ameliorated by the compensating measures. So in terms of income inequality, there is not an issue, but in poverty, there is an issue, the next one. But this is important to highlight this. According to international standards, the next one. Next one, please. Okay. With this, in this case, we are measuring poverty poverty, vulnerability, and middle class using the international standards, okay? And we are comparing in the first set of bars without any compensation, and in the second bars with the government policies. As you can see, in the status quo after compensation, we are measuring, as in pre-crisis, as in the pre-crisis scenarios, there is 6.7% of individuals who are in extreme poverty. After compensating, that level of poverty remains almost unchanged, okay? If you look at the first set of charts, poverty, extreme poverty, according to the international poverty lines, could increase significantly without any compensation. Once we implement the compensation, the extremely poor, those particularly at the bottom, will remain almost unaffected. The main effect of the crisis of this pandemic could rely especially in the middle of the distribution. That is, some middle-class households will be moving towards a more vulnerable situation, but not necessarily we will be the pandemic will be affecting the poorest of the poor, given these compensations as the way they were announced. The next one, please, and I think this is the last one. Yes, the last one. Okay, so official poverty could increase by 6 percentage points at the household and individual level. Cash transfers could mitigate that effect, could diminish that effect, and the increase could be just around 2 percentage points. But according to the international standards that allow us to capture the poorest of the poor, to stratify the poor among destitution, extreme poor, and moderate poor, what we observe is that the poorest of the poor will be protected after compensating measures. Cash benefits could mitigate the effects on the poor, and only a minority in the middle class segment will be slightly affected. So I would like to finish. Sorry about taking much more time. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you for this interesting presentation. Very technical, but very well explained. I think we will come back to you during the question and answer rounds on some of the results and the conclusions you mentioned in the last slide. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is the Director of the Central Bureau of Statistics of Curaçao, Mr. Sean de Boer. Mr. de Boer started his career in 1996 as a junior statistician at CBS. He became then project manager for Sabins and Eustatius. In 2001, project manager for census for the Netherlands Antilles. 2007, continued as program manager for the System for Basic Registries. And in 2011, he became the director of Central for Bureau of Statistics of Curaçao. He's also a part-time lecturer at the University of Curaçao, the Dutch Caribbean. I give to you, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sean de Boer. Welcome, Sean.
And of course, very delighted that we are being followed by listeners all over the world and participants all over the world. My topic for today is how we are addressing the SDG 1 by starting to look at let's say methodologies like the objective monetary poverty, the subjective poverty, and of course the multidimensional approach. Next slide, please. So what is the main objective? That's to eradicate poverty in all its forms. And therefore, you need to collect data. It's very important to have your data in such a way structured that it can be easily accessed and, of course, converted into the indicators that are proposed by the UN methodology Agenda 2030. Of course, we have also, we are following also the governance agreement that has been made in 2017 for the governance period of 2017-2020, and the recently decision, or let's say agreement on growth, that would lay the accent on, or create, put the accent on creating more job opportunities. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Curaçao has a national development plan, as probably you already took notice of in previous presentations. This national strategy implies or use the 6 domains that they are accentuating. The 6 domains: no poverty, of course, good health and well-being, quality education, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, life below water. With regards to the advancements on these domains, this table indicates where we are standing right now with regards to collecting data and, of course, calculating the different indicators, taking into account all the metadata needed, and, of course, also looking into what are the data that are not applicable for this semi-developed country. Next slide, please. As for the poverty data assessment, we dig into the data sources that are needed for to build up the different indicators. And as you see, we have a lot of administrative data that need to be prepared so we can calculate the indicators. We have extensive collaborations with the ministries on the island, and of course third parties that are involved to supply the data that is needed for the indicators. We are still we are in the preparation phase of effectuating or executing the census of 2020 round. At this moment, we had some backlogs with regards to the finance and, of course, other technical issues, capacity, and so on. So that's why probably the census will be postponed until 2022. We are still having internal discussions how we can accelerate the preparations, but as far as I'm seeing it, it's feasible to do the census in 2022 instead of 2021. We did a lot of, there's a baseline study with regards to poverty done back in 2018. That was a household survey that was carried out to measure multidimensional issues at the neighborhood level, since the only way for us right now to have information on a neighborhood level is using the census as the vehicle to collect data and to let's say make the disaggregation on a neighborhood level. So this is the overview of the different sources that we are collecting the data from, so to calculate the indicators for SDG 1. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hello. Yes. With regards to the objective and the subjective monetary poverty line, as you know, the World Bank uses three methodologies to determine the poverty lines. One of them is the cost of basic needs approach, and the second one, the food energy intake, and the third one is the subjective poverty measurement. As you know, in developed countries, there is more preference for the basic needs approach. Income is used primarily in development countries to measure poverty. Both absolute and relative as an objective and subjective poverty are the basis of this approach. The determination of the subject poverty line is based on a qualitative one or a material approach. An example of the quality method is the economic ladder questions. For instance, respondents must indicate on which step of the ladder level of prosperity they are. The income evaluation questions has to do with the currently monthly income, if this is sufficient to meet ends meet. As an example, of course, of the material method. In the households, because Central Bureau of Statistics executes the household expenditure survey. The last one that we did was in 2016. And in this survey, we asked both qualitative and income question. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a table showing the monetary poverty line in Antillean guilders. This table is produced based on the Labor Force Survey 2016-2017, the Household Expenditure Surveys, and of course the Census 2000 analysis using the composition of the households. As you see, if we compare the different sources and we compare the objective method and the subjective method, you can see that are no significant difference, let's say scientific significance difference between these two. You can see in this table also looking at the households in poverty, the comparison with the poverest tool executed by the UNDP and the subjective survey that took place that we collected data from at the households in Curaçao, that the difference is there's almost no difference. That means that the methodology that we are using are very sound. Looking at the individual's poverty, you notice a little bit difference, but that has to do, of course, with the probability and the how you say that, the scope of the surveys, and of course the margins of error that we are applying, and so on and so on. Next slide, please. As for the multidimensional approach, Central Bureau of Statistics Curaçao uses the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative that was created in collaboration with the United Nations Development Program. So we are using this methodology to calculate the multidimensional poverty index. Next slide, please. The multidimensional aspects of poverty give a complete insight of the phenomenon poverty by looking at the health situation of the country, the educational level and how educational level, the livelihood of the community, and of course the standard of living. Next slide, please. What we are doing is we focus on these indicators: the social provision, the functional health problems, the duration of the education. We look at the career based on education obtained, the ICT unemployment rate, quality of work, the need, the overcrowding, electricity, water, sanitary provision, resources, quality of houses. And then we look, then we calculate the head counts and the intensities with regards to against the monetary poverty. Next slide, please. Okay. With regards to the MPI in Curacao, we were motivated by accepting the methodology of the UN and, of course, identify the patterns of poverty. We think this is a flexible methodology that can be easily adjusted to the local priorities and circumstances within a developmental framework and the level of a country. Next slide, please. When we calculate, we see that the head count will bring us out to 21.4%. And if we look at the intensity of the poverty, it brings us around the 24%. Next slide, please. Okay. When we look to at the deprivations by the NPI indicators, of course, these figures are now of the measurements in 2017, but we are awaiting the new calculations for the based on the new labor force surveys of 2018 and 2020. 2019, we did not collect this information within our labor force survey, but we do have the data of 2018 and 2020. And I was told that in December of this year, we will have the new calculations for the MPI. But looking at these figures, we see that matters of concern are, of course, on the field of ICT and quality of work. Next slide, please. And this is a composite presentation of the MPI indicators to give you, let's say, the concentration of within the different categories. We have where the concentration is with regards to the deprivations. Next slide, please. When we keep looking at the composite, we see, for instance, that the big blocks here are, of course, again, the quality of work section, and we look at the ICT. Those are the bigger blocks of the MPI sections of the MPI. Next slide, please. I will go quickly through these figures because it's just to show you how it is possible for us to calculate and go deeper, go in depth in the topic, so we can get a better insight when we are going to develop a possible program or create a policy around it. Let's see here, we see the figures of the poor. Next slide, yes, it's no problem. We see here some information with regards to the household size. We see the non-poor, concentration around the 2 and the 3, the households with 2 or 3 persons in it. We see the vulnerable poor. We see are the ones, especially in the of the one-person households, the two-person households, and so on and so on. Next slide, please. This is a presentation of the household income, and as we look at the poor and the extreme poor, we see that the concentration for the poor of the income is around 850, between 850 guilders and 1,500 guilders. And as we look for the extreme poor, as you know, that was a very small group. We see that they barely have an income of 550, between 550, 850 guilders. Next slide, please. Another presentation, let's say disaggregated by male, female. So next slide, please. And another presentation with, that give you an insight of the demographic pressure. As you know, the demographic pressure are the groups that are dependent of certain groups in our community. Of course, the working groups in our community. Next slide, please. This is a dependency ratio. Give you some information about how it is how the divisions are within the different groups, like the non-poor, the vulnerable poor, and the extreme poor. Next slide, please. This is an interesting one because this one, for instance, you need the census data to create this one, because this is a geo-referential information, and the only source that collect at this time geo-referential information is the census. But of course, we are discussing with the ministries to see how we can collect data on this type of level. But as you look into the census information, you can see the neighborhoods of concern. Those are, you can call it orange, yellow ones. And of course, the blue ones are the neighborhoods with acceptable living conditions. Next slide, please. So, how we are planning to catch up on the backlog, because we do have a backlog with regards to collection of the data. As you go back in the previous slide, the first one, you saw that we are a little bit behind schedule on collecting data, and some of the indicators we need to discuss with certain groups. Upcoming Friday, we organized a roundtable with the National Statistical Commission that we have instituted, and the idea is to discuss capacity strengthening and division of the task. As this time, our bureau deals with a lack of capacity, and therefore it's for us impossible to do it by our own. So discussing with them how we're gonna advance, maybe we can divide the task and move quicker forward. We have set some targets. I think by the end of February 2021, probably we have some indicators completed based on the administrative sources. If everybody have the let's say the space in their program to work quick on and advance quick on the indicators, I think that by the end of February we do have a lot of indicators in place. As for the calculating of the MPIs based on the LFS 2018-2020, I think we have more information, more new, fresh information by December 2020. We need to collect, as I told you recently, and we need to collect georeferential information. I think the best vehicle to do that will still be the census, and the census probably will take place around March 2020. And we are finishing calculations with regards to our information coming out of our household expenditure survey that we need to use for national accounts. Those calculations that are needed for the SDG, maybe we have them finished by the end of November 2020. Next slide. Next slide. I thank you, and if you have any other questions or remarks, please make them you can do that at the end of all the presentations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. De Boer. Thank you for giving us a great overview of the data gathering efforts, but also the data challenges that the CBS and Curac are facing, and also for giving us a great overview of the objective, subjective, and multi-dimensional poverty line in Curaçao. Thank you. So moving on quickly to our last speaker for today, Ms. Yadira Schonenberg-Hasselmeier, MSc, is Acting Policy Director of the Ministry of Social Development, Labor and Welfare in Curaçao. She is a psychologist by profession and has over 25 years of working experience in the government working on social policy. She is also responsible for the budget coordination within the ministry. The title of her presentation is Working on Poverty Reduction in Curaçao from the Social Perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Yadira Hasselmeier, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, my part of this is on a totally different side. You've heard a lot of technical information, but now I'm going to give you a little bit of the social information, what's happening right now in our community. We also use the same explanation of poverty as Steen de Boer has mentioned, the poverty from the multidimensional perspective. And I need to hurry through my slides, so I won't be using all of them. So you will see me going past some of them. I will just touch. Please go to the next slide. I will just touch the next one, please. Yes. I will just touch on some of the topics inside the multidimensional perspective because they are important to mention. The poverty is more than a lack of income and resources to ensure a sustainable livelihood. It manifests itself through hunger and malnutrition, limited access to education and other basic services, social discrimination and exclusion, as well as the lack of participation in decision-making processes. In all of this, inclusion is a key to economic growth in order to provide sustainable jobs and to promote equality. Next slide, please. To achieve poverty reduction, these following elements must be tackled, of which some are included in the Social Development Agenda for Curaçao based on the Agreement on Growth Groei Accord. Laws and institutional frameworks must be revised and modified. Decent jobs for all must be created and participation on the labor market enhanced. The educational system must be improved. Urban infrastructure must be upgraded. Welfare and care must be available for all. In the next few sheets, I will briefly address these items. Next, please. Next, please. Yes. The revision and modification of laws and institutional governance frameworks. One of them is the family resilience programs to prevent those with debts, economic challenges, who are at risk of dropping into poverty, are being implemented. So the programs are being implemented. Also, the draft law on debt restructuring, which we do not have yet, is ready, the draft, to move into the process of becoming a law. The National Plan for the Prevention of Violence Against Children and Relational Domestic Violence is in place, out of which several recommendations are being worked out. Next, please. Employment opportunities. It is necessary that the match between supply and demand is improved and that labor participation increases. Right now, there is a mismatch between the demand of the labor market and the supply from the schools. And that is something that needs to be tackled. To achieve better working conditions for the employee, employment legislation is being evaluated and updated. This is one of the elements that is taken in the Curac. Okay, all of these things need to be done in cooperation with other ministries, and this can be a challenge at times. Next, please. Improved education and care systems. Access to early childhood programs and services must be universalized. Except for the normal daycare, children of the focus groups of the Ministry of Social Development, Labor and Welfare, the people receiving social assistance, are taken into childcare to enable the often single mothers to participate in work-related activities. Next, please. Improved housing is also very important because there are many families of many generations living in one house, which is not very convenient. So in the last few years, social housing, 134 houses were built in the neighborhoods of Curac, Sapate, and Mondayamo. This will enable families to live in different conditions, better conditions, and more social, being more social with one another. Next, please. Creating safe public spaces is important to the neighborhood. Through the renovation of community and multifunctional centers, opportunities are being created for the neighborhoods to come together and participate in diverse social activities. This work is work in progress. For example, the community centers in the neighborhoods Gibraltar, Brievengat, and Kusberg are in the building phase right now, and those in Buena Vista and Mondaye and the Barber Multifunctional Center are in the financing phase at this moment. So there is a lot happening in Curacao for our focus groups, the vulnerable people in our community. Next, please. The impact of COVID, that's what Mr. Ortiz already have told us about. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit our country hard, as it has around the world. It is not just a health crisis, but it will have very severe social and economic consequences for years to come. These consequences also include a lack of confidence in between people because of all the insecurities they are facing. So people are not trusting each other very much in these days or in the coming period. The impact on the already vulnerable target groups and human basic needs in Curacao is enormous and has not yet been mapped out. Even though we have some numbers, but we don't know the real impact yet. Next sheet, please. Some ways the population of Curac has been impacted is that many employees lose their jobs, no matter the benefits to employers, to the effect of preventing job loss. So even though the employers get money from the government to prevent them sending people away, so people are losing their jobs anyway. Also, employees do not always receive their full or a part of their payment on time. To support the most vulnerable groups, the poor, the chronically ill, the elderly, and children in the community, the first interventions are aimed at guaranteeing access to essential services and social protection. Next, please. The strategies used in our ministry right now are some examples are food supply through food packages or social cards. The numbers are approximately 13,000 families have received food packages through the food bank. Employment loss benefits, what I just mentioned. People, the number of persons who lost their jobs that have received an unemployment loss benefit is 1,760 until August 20th passed. The number of persons who lost their jobs that have received a social card for food supplies at a supermarket is 2,904 until August 20th passed. Next, please. There are also resilience benefits that are being handed out to our focus groups. The number of people receiving social assistance who have received a social card for food supplies is 7,488 until August 20th. Strengthening financial resilience is also one of the strategies that is being used, and this is mainly regarding social problematic debts. Not that I have a mortgage that I can pay, but if I have many debts that I cannot pay anymore. So therefore, establishing an integral debt assistance process that mediates, guides, and settles debts is planned and needs to be carried out. Provided psychosocial support is also very important in these times. As everywhere else, people here also suffer mentally under the impact of COVID-19 and are in need of psychosocial support. And also something very important, since we are told to wash our hands and be hygienic all the time, for those whose water supply connection was cut off, mostly because of financial reasons, the reconnection must be ensured. Next, please. The challenges we face related to the 2030 agenda, and now and in the near future, and taking the impact of COVID-19 into account, is that there needs to be cooperation between all sectors, an integral approach, prevention of polarization. And this could be a great challenge. The attainment of inclusion and participation of all in the community. The availability of sufficient financial means, which might be an extra big challenge, because as we heard a while ago, maybe 10,000 people will be unemployed, and all these people are going to apply for social assistance, and that will be a great challenge to be able to give these people this assistance. The implementation of a different result-based approach instead of the same approach of kind of policy that we have been using over the past 50 years maybe, and that has not led to a real reduction of poverty. The creativity of our population needs to be stimulated. Next, please. The taking of stock of the applied interventions and the best practices, please. Thank you. The taking of stock of the applied interventions and best practices is something that is also very important, because we need to know if the interventions that we are giving the people, if it's working, or if there needs to be a different kind of approach. And that is the same thing. Interventions tailored to the needs of the focus groups must be provided when we know what the interventions are that people really need. And something very important for being able to take all these challenges is that the monitoring and evaluation of all things we do must be realized. Thank you very much. The last slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for this, indeed, showing us what is really happening on the social arena in Curacao and hopeful after seeing all these developments that the ministry has been doing amidst this difficult times of COVID-19. Thank you very much. Stay tuned for our question and answer session. Let me check first as we go in virtually. Um, I have the first question for Ms. Yadira Hasselmeyer. How did the ministry calculate the compensation amount? Can you elaborate on financial resilience? And why is affordable electricity not mentioned as a priority for poor and vulnerable families?
I'm sorry, I did not quite catch the question. Could you please repeat?
Yes, of course. Yes. So, how did the ministry calculate the compensation amount? And can you elaborate on the financial resilience? And why is affordable electricity not mentioned as a priority for the poor and vulnerable families?
Okay,
Yeah.
I have two colleagues with me, but it needs to be checked before I can give an answer.
Okay.
We'll come back before the end of the session.
All right. Okay. I will continue then with Mr. De Boer. What does the date of the MPI, Multidimensional Poverty Index, mean for policy and programs from Curaçao? For Curaçao.
Okay, I think since it's going, it's focusing on the more social dynamics of the poverty, how people are experience their their constraints in their life with regards to accessibility to education, accessibility to health services. If you take this information or you use this information, it will emphasize the intensity that how the intensity of people are living these constraints. And I think for policy, it's let's say the most important way to look at poverty instead of keep looking at the monetary aspects of poverty, because by just calculating how much a household need does not necessarily means that these people are not their accessibility to certain facilities and so on are not restricted. Someone could have let's say an income, a reasonable income, but still deprived from some aspects. And that's why the social approach of poverty gives you also an idea how people deals with certain things, but it gives an insight or what you have to look at when you're dealing with households. As Ms. Yadira mentioned, it's very important these kind of measurements, because it will give you also a psychological approach of the matter. Are you there?
I'm here. Yes. The next question is for Mr. Eduardo Ortiz Juarez. And Eduardo, what data would Curaçao need to collect additionally to create a better picture if we look at poverty? Did you hear the question? Yes? Okay.
What data do I need to
Yeah.
improve
What would we need
the picture,
essentially?
right? Okay.
What would be the ideal situation to gather,
Yeah.
ideal
No, the
data to gather?
ideas.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. No, the ideal situation would be to have. I mean, the labor force survey has proven to be a very, very useful tool not only for the measurement that Mr. Sean has showed and that allowed us to simulate these scenarios, but I think that a more comprehensive, an extension of this survey in order to capture other sources of income, for instance, non-labor income, right? Because these results are based mainly on labor income and some benefits. But the non-labor component, that is, for instance, remittances, other private transfers, other main sources who typically represent an important share of income, would be ideal to have those, right? In an ideal world, also capture the expenditure level of households would be fantastic, because that will allow other type of analysis and of course to contrast consistency between income and consumption, and no? That would be the ideal world. But I think that just an extension to other sources of income and an improvement of some non-monetary characteristics of households, the dwellings, and the individuals will be ideal for us to have a broad picture, a full picture of income-based poverty and multidimensional poverty, with the option of having a richer set of household and individual characteristics to build these, for instance, these non-monetary dimensions of well-being.
One particular element of that question, I think maybe we are very well informative for the people to know, is about also the aspect of resiliency, of bouncing back. Can you elaborate on the financial resilience? What are you guys doing here at the ministry to stimulate or to work on that aspect?
Yes. People with debts. We try to help these people, and we do different things. We do what you call early signaling of debts, so you are going to have problems with their debts. So that's one of the things that is included in the whole package of being resilient. Also, people are having different kinds of training, and for next year we have really put on our on our agenda and on our I can't find the word, begroting, to get the to make sure that people are getting resilient. We are trying to make some things in the villages, in the neighborhoods, training of the people and such things that is planned for next year. Right now we are focusing a little bit more on, because that is what we see that is one of the great problems with the COVID pandemic.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yadira. So, regret of time, we have another session also starting at 16 hours. So I would like to thank our speakers this afternoon very, very much. Thanks Eduardo Ortiz Juarez, Mr. Sean de Boer, and Ms. Yadira Insightful, seeing SDG 1, no poverty from perspective, but also from a social perspective. I applaud this, and I think I have to continue. Thank you very much, and thank you also to our virtual participants. And stay tuned. At 16 hours, we'll have our session on SDG number 8, economic growth and decent jobs for all, with the Ministry of Economic Development. Presenting will be the Minister of Economic Development, Mr. Dr. Stephen, the Sector Director for Innovation, Ms. like Moog, people from the circular economy, Curaçao Donut, Mr. Juan Carlo Goylo, and Mr. Yuri Altate. Stay tuned at 16 hours. We'll have an interesting webinar again. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's session of the Sustainable Development Goals number 8. I'm your moderator for today. My name is Suleika Mook. I'm the Sector Director of Economic Development and Innovation at the Ministry of Economic Development. The focus of my sector is the development of traditional but also new economic sectors, continuous development of the economic infrastructure of Curaçao, and to stimulate innovation and smart nation development. As you know, this has been a week starting from 28th of September of the SDG Action Week of Curaçao. It's a worldwide action week, a week of inspiring local and international speakers, exciting panels and virtual sessions where you can learn more about the Sustainable Development Goals and how Curaçao national priorities are aligned with the agenda of the 2030 and the SDGs, and how you can contribute also to local implementation of the global goals, building on the pillars of people, planet, prosperity, and partnership. Today, we have two presentations that will be very enlightening on the topic of today, that is the decent work and economic growth of the SDG 8. But before we start with the presentations, I would like to give some perspective on this theme. One of the key pillars of the National Development Plan of Curaçao reflects the attention to the economy and specifically to the SDG goal number 8, promote sustained, inclusive and economic growth, sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all. The long-term policy will be guided by the aims to boost competitiveness, improve infrastructure, and diversify the economy further. In addition, within the NDP, interventions concerning structural reform and government support, sectoral growth, government investments, and aimed at broadening ownership of the economic process are planned and spelled out into the several programs, initiatives, and legislative changes. Overall, there is a strong recognition of the need to upgrade to economic model of Curaçao. Despite the countries having a significantly diversified economy, speaking Caribbean, several other in the Caribbean, the National Development Plan acknowledges the existing economic limits while seeking to boost competitiveness and improving infrastructure for the sake of diversifying the economy even further. This is important because one of our presentations today will aim to a new sector we are certainly trying now to develop in order to diversify the economy of Curaçao much further. These challenges and reform proposals are also documented in various recent country strategy documents from development partners and research institutes. The SDG goal number 8 has 3 specific target goals that will be, I think, today's focus, because the presentations will focus on how Curaçao can develop its economy in a sustainable way. 3 of these target goals are: achieve higher level of economic productivity through diversification, technological upgrading, and innovation. That's important for you to know because innovation will be, as we've seen already through the COVID period, a very focus point towards all the other implementations that will be within the economy. Furthermore, to promote development-oriented policies that support productive activities, decent job creation, entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation once again, and encourage the formalization and growth of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Therefore, the MKB, the medium, small, and medium enterprises is also a focus of the ministry. And last but not least, improve progressively through 2030 the global resource efficiency in consumption and production, and endeavor to decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. So the sustainable link is not once again emphasized, and that will be also one of the aspects that we are taking very seriously in the further development of our economy. Well, without further ado, who are our speakers for this session? Well, our first speaker is our Minister of Economic Development, Dr. Steven Martina. He will have a presentation about the road to sustainable economic growth and employment for all. That is the topic for today. Our Minister, Steven Martina, is well known as the Minister of Economic Development and Vice Prime Minister of the Government of Curaçao as of May 2020. And also, before that, from June 2017 up to February 2019, and before that, from the period of January to June 2013. He's also had the function of President and CEO of Guardian Group Fatum, and before that, also the President of the CEO Aqualectra since February 1999 until May 2017, with the exemption, of course, of the period of January till June 2013. His specialism is a strategic management, governance, and regulatory economics. He was a guest lecturer at the University of Curaçao, ICUC, Governance University, Public Utility Research Center, PURC, in Gainesville, and also a former member of various companies and foundations. So, without further ado, welcome to Minister Steven Martina for his presentation.
Good afternoon. For me, a pleasure to present today the road to sustainable economic growth and employment for all. A very interesting topic within the realm of sustainable development. And for the fact we are going to emphasize sustainable economic development. What we would like to do is promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. So let's put it in perspective. We're talking about sustainability, and sustainability is about people, prosperity, planet, peace, and partnerships. So within this context, we are striving for sustainability, meaning that whatever we do today should not compromise tomorrow for our kids and their kids. Having said that, within this context, we have a national development plan based on sustainable development goals. And Curaçao has adopted those 6 sustainable development goals. No poverty, good health and well-being, but also quality education, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, and also a life below water. So today, I will focus on economic growth and decent work for all. Having said that, if we look into this chapter, actually we're talking about a roadmap. We're talking about development. We're talking about a never-ending journey that we are about to embark. So in the end, what we would like to achieve are more jobs, but actually better jobs to get into better lives.
So this is the aim in the end, what we would like to achieve by pursuing economic development. It's a journey, as said, and I would like to invite you to embark on this journey. If we embark on this journey, there are a couple of things, a couple of themes that we need to put attention into. We need to assess where we are today, and then we can aspire where we want to be, and then we need to architect to show the road how we are today against what we would like to be, and in the end we need to implement, and that is by saying to act and advance. So let's go into the theme of assessing where we are today. And to assess where we are today, let's go back in 2015, where we were looking forward, and we knew that in 2020 we would be severely challenged because of debt maturity, foreign tax rules that would expire, and also the refinery lease ceases to exist. So these themes were very, very important that we would address them. And then, moving forward, when we went into government by 2017 and 2018, actually we proclaimed it as a perfect storm, because not only we needed to deal with these three matters, but also with a Venezuela crisis, a refinery that was not operational, bankruptcy of several entities, a severe public debt, and several stressed entities in our society like the Hero Bank. All of that coming together in the years 2018 and 2019. So it was not only that we needed to weather the storm, but those provoked things like all economic parameters not in the right way. Our GDP was shrinking, our debt was increasing, and our unemployment was increasing. Here you can see a couple of those trends. They were going in the wrong direction. So what needed to happen is course correct those trends. And we could also see that we are in a negative spiral, so-called negative output gap. So the big question became how to course correct. What we can say for 2020 is that despite all of these challenges, 2020 actually had the most promising outlook. Recovery was underway. And I would like to show a couple of interesting developments that were projected for 2020. If you look at our budget deficit of the government, you could see that in 2017 we had a huge deficit, almost 160 so many million. In 2018 and 2019, that has been aggressively reduced. And by 2020, we were looking into a budget surplus. So basically, the way we have been able to manage our public finances was positive. And also what we can say in terms of our country compliance, we were, back in the days, partially compliant, and by the end of 2019, we went into a status of largely compliant by the OECD. This creates a very solid foundation for our international services to thrive again, but also what you proclaim outside as a country that is largely compliant is a good environment for investments. So we have achieved that as well. Another very thriving sector back in 2017, 2018, and 2019 was our tourism sector. And you could see that from 2018 coming into 2019, we had at least 7% growth of our stay-over visitors, and the same goes for our cruise tourism. And within a couple of very important markets, we achieved growth figures of 10% for the Netherlands and 28% for Colombia. So our tourism was thriving with a very positive outlook for 2020. Then, what happened? What happened in 2020? Basically, 2020 came along and we were confronted with this international pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we are still in this pandemic. But it was not only the pandemic that we got as a hit, but also our refinery ceased to operate. And while we were very positive that by July we would have a new operator that would guarantee the operations of the refinery, regretfully, this didn't happen to come along. So where are we today? It's not only a fiscal cliff, not only a perfect storm, but actually a thunderstorm that we are in at the moment. So then the big question becomes, how does this impact our public finances? And you can see at the graph that by the end of the year, we will have a public deficit of at least 670 million. So we have quite a challenge as a consequence of COVID and as a consequence of a non-operational refinery. Then the question becomes, how do we course correct? Knowing all of this, having assessed all of this, how do we course correct? Basically what we did is enter into a survival mode and into a recovery mode. And I would like to touch this very, very quick. Talking about the survival mode, basically what the government did was, and I need the following slide, was coming with some survival packages, what we call the Alivio package. There were several arrangements for entrepreneurs, but also for companies that could apply for job loss assistance. But also lending on favorable conditions was one of the things that we made available, but also things like work time reduction and ease on loans. Actually, if we look into these packages, we could see that in the period of April up to August, for the entrepreneurs, we had almost 3,051 applicants. It's now decreasing because the market has come out of a lockdown, but it started very, very aggressive. In total, already a figure of 22 million that has been put into these arrangements. And if we look into the what they call now arrangement for employers and through the employers guarantee payment for the employees, we can see that at least 1,327 companies have applied in the beginning, and in total 18,843 employees. Gradually, this has been decreasing, and a total amount of 71 million is involved. So all of this is in place to create a survival mode. Also, what we can see, what has been done, is a credit facility for SMEs. And here you can see that there were several programs for credit lines, for loans, but also for supporting small businesses, giving coaching programs and also training programs, especially to promote people that have lost their jobs or people with interesting ideas to go to that next level, become an entrepreneur, and start their own businesses. All right, having said that, what we now are aiming for is what we now would like to aim for is our sustainable economic development process. We had a survival mode, we are now in a recovery mode, but basically looking forward, we need to go into what we call sustainable economic development. And basically, as we have assessed where we are, now we need to aspire where we want to be. Having said that, we continued with our aspiration to be connected, sustainable, hospitable, and innovative. Basically, to thrive within a vision, to become a nation with a vibrant, innovative, and sustainable economy, recognized globally as a primary place to live, learn, play, work, and do business. Having said that, in the end, what we want to achieve are more jobs, and better lives. So, if that is the aspiration that we would like to pursue, how are we going to get there? Basically, what we believe needs to be done is to promote development. We cannot maintain in an environment of austerity. The IMF also says that it is now not the time for austerity, but the time for stimulus. The Nobel Prize winner economist, Mr. Paul Krugman, also stated this. It is now time for stimulus. But also the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mr. Mark Rutte, did say it's not time now to reduce costs and to come into austerity, but it is now time to go into a stimulus. Having said that, we can now look into our economic development framework building blocks. And that consists of a couple of items. First and foremost, investments. If we look into our sectors, you can see that there are a couple of sectors that are most promising in which we have identified investments to happen. In our tourism sector, in our energy sector, maritime, all of these we have identified lots of interesting investments to be executed. But not only investments, also areas for development. I would like to focus on one of these areas for development, which you can see today the several works being executed. If we look, for example, into our RIF area, you can see, for example, projected the Marriott Courtyard, which is a project that's already up and running in terms of construction, in terms of the ground, making the ground ready for construction. And then the mangrove area, you could see that there is a lot of work happening there to take away all of the contamination and make it a beautiful park. And one of the very, game changers that we have recently realized in the country is the Corendon Hotel that's already there, up and running. So there is a vision to beautify and develop that whole area that at present is within execution. And then last week, we have announced, for example, the Rift and Corridor area, where you could see that we are, at the moment, are beautifying that whole area. Having said that, if you go there, you could see that around the Tula area, but also at Sunset Heights, all of that is now being renovated. If we continue, there's also a vision for the Zakito area. And within the Zakito area, where Aqualector is seated today, there should become a huge tourism development with hotels and apartments. But not only that area, but also the Zakito area, where on the side of the road, already permits have been given for the construction of 100 luxury hotel apartments. And also that part of the water will be converted in a places where you can have yachts. That is a very interesting development that's taking place at the moment. The same has been done with the Bullenbaai area, where we created a vision document to make that area far more productive, and because of that, to create decent work. At present, we are very, very interested, very, very content to say that together with the Port of Rotterdam, this area is now being analyzed to interest investors. And at the moment, it has been announced that the All Terminal is back into operation. We can look into, for example, the Santa Marta area, where a huge project has been announced, and that development is continuing. Also, a very interesting area would be our downtown. In our downtown, a lot is happening in terms of what we call the orange economy. Basically, the whole area has been identified how to develop it. And actually what we could say is that there was a summit, which we called Invest Willemstad, held last year. And because of that, lots of those places that today are not being used do have potential investors that are interested to redevelop that. There's also a website in which we can invite investors to look at those real estate assets for them if they are interested to do an investment. And by doing that, we promote investment, by investment, jobs to be created, and by doing that, economic activity. So this is just an example of the areas of development. Like these areas, we have identified lots of areas within Curaçao that should be developed, and by developing those areas, promote economic development and promote the creation of decent work. Let's now go into another pillar, which we call export. We are now in the process of defining our export strategy. This booklet has been launched, a strategic trade development roadmap, and at present we have already identified the several export dimensions, and we are now creating strategies, winning strategies to enhance our export capability. Here you could see the several sectors and their contribution to foreign exchange, tourism by far, and international services. And what we would like to do is focus on those areas, come with strategies how to even increase more export within our economy. And then last but not least, to do all of this, you need enablers for development. If we are talking about enablers for development, basically we are talking about structural reforms, macroeconomic policies, and also economic development policies. And you can see all those structural reforms. I will highlight one of them, which I believe is one of the most important that we need to focus on, which we call Invest Curaçao. Basically, if we talk about Invest Curaçao, there should be funds so that we can stimulate our economy. We already have an emergency fund, and we are now negotiating to come up with an economic recovery fund. This economic recovery fund will consist of a business retention portion and a business development portion. Business retention portion is to assist those companies that are healthy companies but need some capital injection at the moment because of the COVID consequences. And then we go into business development. Those will be new developments that can be guaranteed or financed. So through this economic recovery fund, we will have a very powerful instrument to promote business retention, to promote business development, and by doing so, creating specific projects that will be executed. And once those projects are executed, that means jobs are being created, people will get work, a lot of synergy will exist, and by doing so, our economy will thrive again and grow. So that's why this instrument, which we call Invest Curaçao, is very, very important, and at the moment is what we are negotiating to get an emergency fund based on which we can promote economic development in our country. And not to forget, public investment funds for the government to do public investments in infrastructure, things like public lighting, things like roads, things like maintenance of schools, etc., etc. All of this, if we are able to create the ability and the accessibility to those funds, then we will be able to, in a proactive way, stimulate our economy, create economic activity, and in the end, jobs that are most needed. If we look into the policy side, you see there down in that table, the Dagnut economy. I'm mentioning this because the speakers that will be going to give you a following presentation will go into the Dagnut economy, which is a very innovative way how to promote economic development. So, what did we talk about? Very, very quick. We talked about where we are today. We have assessed the situation. Based on that, we looked into an aspiration, a vision, where we want to be. And then we presented how to get there through our economic development building blocks, which consists of sector and area developments, but also on workforce development and also on enablers to promote development. All of these pillars within our economic development framework, these building blocks, we have lots of plans, lots of actions to promote our economy, and by doing so, create economic growth and in the end, decent work for all. So through this, we would like to achieve more jobs, and in the end, better lives. Our ambition is to retain the existing jobs and create 15,000 new jobs in the coming 3 to 5 years. This will need a private investment portfolio for at least 1.5 billion, but also a public investment portfolio of at least 500 million. And we would like to increase our export by at least 10%. We have the programs, the plans, the projects in place to realize this. That's why we are very, very comfortable that once we have all the instruments in place, we will be able to create this economic stimulus, and by doing so, create sustainable economic development. Having said that, I would like to end by saying all what we are doing should be within the realm of sustainability. Our constant focus should be meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Thank you very much, and I hope that you are also inspired how we are going to the road to sustainable economic growth and employment for all. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Martina, for an elaborate presentation about how we can develop our economy sustainably. As you all got the message, I got it loud and clear. The achievement and aspiration is to create more jobs, not only more jobs, but better jobs, and for that, also better lives. How do we course direct? As Minister Martina has said, we're in a survival mode, but we have to enter the mode of recovery and to furthermore enhance into the sustainable economic development. So it's time for stimulus, not reduction of cost and austerity. And for that we will need investment projects, we will need that in different sectors, development of areas and zone, like you've heard, Sakito area, and also the increase of export for at least 10%. And last but not least, enablers for development is also an imperative, like the Invest Curaçao, where we will be aiming towards getting more funding, besides the emergency fund that we already are getting, also the economic recovery fund for almost 500 million that would be needed to create 15,000 new jobs, and also public investment and public fund, so we can continue investing also in infrastructure in Curaçao. So it's been said what we need to focus and what is needed to go for a more sustainable economic development. Like the minister said, in terms of policy strategy, it's also important to gain and go over new sectors, like the donut economy, like the circular economy that will give more possibilities for economic development that is in line with other developments, such as the environmental development of Curaçao. Through these types of sectors, the comparison and building the goals between pillars of people, planet, prosperity, and partnership are being identified. So it's very important that within the new opportunities we have now to develop our economy, to diversify our economy further, that we take notice into the possibilities of these new sectors like the donut economy. Saying that, we are going now to the next presenters for this session. This presentation will be about Curaçao donut economy Designing a Thriving Nation. For this presentation, we have Juan Carlos Goylo and Yuri Altheten. Juan Carlos Goylo works for the Chief Technology Office as a Senior Innovation Officer of Amsterdam. He was born and raised in Curaçao and is dedicated to make the island enter a sustainable future. So we're very happy that he's here, that he's back, and he is currently doing a PhD on this topic, and you will now and then also see him perform in the cultural arena. Besides Juan Carlos, we have also Yuri Altheten. His mission is to lead and help organizations and projects that enhance sustainable well-being. After studying business economics in Amsterdam, he launched his first company, Cinco Consultancy, in 2008. Cinco has worked with the Ministry of Economic Development, Ministry of Social Affairs, CTB, ACU, and many other local organizations. In 2017, he founded the Stichting Wintertuin Curaçao, a foundation that promotes literature and storytelling. His latest company is Wawuya, a company that produces and distributes final products using natural glowing plants from Curaçao. So this is like circular economy already in action. In March of this year, Yuri launched also the platform Curaçao Donut Economy, a bottom-up initiative to use the donut model as a formally embraced tool for transformative action in Curaçao. Today, the CDE's platform has more than 30 active members as all from all walks of life. So without further ado, here are the presenters for the Curaçao Donut Economy, Designing a Thriving Nation, Juan Carlos Goylo and Yuri Altheten.
5 años pasados, el mundo va de acuerdo con la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible, que te concentrar en una cantidad de 17 metas para el desarrollo sostenible. La agenda te encerra un plan de acción dirigido a gente, planeta, prosperidad y paz que se quiere realizar a través de colaboración entre partenares. La misión para mejorar la calidad de vida y transformar el mundo sin la ningún gente que detrás. O a pensar tocante con nos, abo y ami, que laga el mundo aquí atrás para futuras generaciones. Bo a llegar de punto de mes uno no está para actualmente y 4 acciones que nos Mr. Toma ainda para lograr realizar el método para el desarrollo sostenible del año 2030. La primera edición de Curaçao SDG Action Week está bochando para compartir la idea de la implementación del método para el desarrollo sostenible en Curaçao. Join el evento virtual aquí de 28 de septiembre para 2 de octubre 2020. Para registrar of más información, visita nuestro website www.curaçao2030.cv of Facebook SDG Curaçao 2030. 5 años pasados, el mundo va de acuerdo con la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible, que te concentrar en una cantidad de 17 metas para el desarrollo sostenible. La agenda te encerra un plan de acción dirigido a gente, planeta, prosperidad y paz que se quiere realizar a través de colaboración entre partenares. La misión para mejorar la calidad de vida y transformar el mundo sin la ningún gente que detrás. O a pensar tocante con nos, abo y ami, que laga el mundo aquí atrás para futuras generaciones. Bo a llegar de punto de mes uno no está para actualmente y 4 acciones que nos Mr. Toma ainda para lograr realizar el método para el desarrollo sostenible del año 2030. La primera edición de Curaçao SDG Action Week está bochando para compartir la idea de la implementación del método para el desarrollo sostenible en Curaçao. Join el evento virtual aquí de 28 de septiembre para 2 de octubre 2020. Para registrar of más información, visita nuestro website www.curaçao2030.cv of Facebook SDG Curaçao 2030. Cinco años pasados, el mundo va de acuerdo con la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible, que te concentrar en una cantidad de 17 metas para el desarrollo sostenible. La agenda te encerra un plan de acción dirigido a gente, planeta, prosperidad y paz que se quiere realizar a través de colaboración entre partenares. La misión para mejorar a qualidade de vida e transformar o mundo sem largar ninguém de queda atrás. O apenas tocante com nós, abo e ami, que larga o mundo aqui atrás para futuras gerações. O aí que de ponto de mês uma não está para atualmente e quatro ações que nós Mr. Toma ainda para lograr realizar e meter para desenvolvimento sustentável de ano 2030. A primeira edição de Curac SDG Action Week está boas para compartilhar boa ideia na riba implementação de meter para desenvolvimento sustentável na Curaçao. Join evento virtual aqui de 28 de setembro para 2 de outubro 2020. Para registrar ou mais informação, visita nosso website www.curaçao2030.cv of Facebook SDG Curaçao 2030.
Bom dia, boa tarde. A mim é Juan Carlos e me aqui junto com Yuri. Então, nós queremos trazer a história de Curaçao Donut Economy. É uma história muito interessante para você entender, mas não somente entender, Curaçao Donut Economy também over de participação, que vem aqui, nós vamos apresentar algo que imediatamente nós queremos ativar para pensar junto com nós. A apresentação deve começar agora. Minuto vai ter me dilante. Até bem. Curaçao Donut Economy. Nós queremos que a economia que nós vivemos agora aqui é sistema que cambia. É sistema que nós por cambia. Se nós walk back do passado, esse sistema aqui estava até acaba do passado. Nós integramos den ayanang de 19 8 na bisa estava cambio grande a tomar lugar da economia. Estava tendo problema com outra parte do mundo, parecido com agora aqui. Nós estava tendo mal contato com a Venezuela. Nós estava tendo coisas com outra parte do mundo, que agora aqui, no momento, não vai dormir. Então, depois, de repente, cambio me será bem. Você está tendo pobreza, está tendo problema. Então, durante esse cambio, bem dilante está uma economia moderna. Dentro da temporada, estava uma economia de passar e baseta. É da passar a telecomunicação. Então, a economia é a trazer hope e prosperidade para Curaçao sua economia. Ela laga Curaçao também é pioneiro no mundo aqui que nós vivemos. Então, pero o que nós mira é que o sistema aqui está cambiando. Então, me quero hope importante para esse sistema nós está realizar que o sistema está cambia, mas se nós podemos cambiar, a realização é a realização que nós está sistema que está constantemente cambiando. Ainda me tem problema com o slide não. Seguinte slide, por favor. Essa aqui é o que me quero bisa você agora. Agora me não há chance de bisa. O problema está dentro do sistema. Sistema que nós mesmos criamos, que se nós realizar com esse sistema algo que nós mesmos criamos, nós por cambiar. Seguinte slide, por favor.
Sim, danke Juan Carlos. Então, sistema depende de gente, então consiste de gente. Então, nós falamos de sistema econômico que nós temos atualmente, obviamente da sistema linear economy. Então, para nós aqui com essa para apenas definir economia promedio. Então, se nós walk back, é a definição de uma economia, de uma palavra que sai fora de grego de antes, ou economia da para manejo de hogar. Hoje custa para casa ou hogar, então no meio da derivação de nemo que men manejar, que men como manejar hogar. Então em meta de tempo aí, tá passar para tu rende de hogar para viver bom, para viver vida placentero, tem limitação de ética de tempo aí, que men tava sistema ético que tem alguma condição ou algum conceito que tava forma é base de esse, qual tava abundância no primeiro lugar. Que segundo o grego, na natureza está oferecer suficiente para tu para viver bom, racionalidade, que é sunco está manejar o hogar, está usar sua racionalidade para poder suministrar cada membro do hogar coloca na tá mester, então de três surplus, que para criar mais coloca para te mester de dia. Então, esse aí está dando é jefe de hogar, é espaço para poder usar seu tempo para coisas mais relevantes. to English. We're talking about linear economy. So I was just explaining that in order to define a linear economy, you have to think about what economy means. It's a Greek word meaning to manage a household. And I was just saying that in the Greek definition, the goal of managing the household is to make sure that everybody can live a decent life. And the way we look at economics nowadays is much different. It's actually what the Greeks would have called grammatistic. So it's about accumulation of wealth. And so the accumulation of wealth has become an end in itself instead of a means. And this for the Greeks was very unethical.
Yes.
They really thought this was a crazy thing to do because in our definition of economics, there are scarce resources, and it's about allocating these scarce resources to fulfill endless needs. So you see there are two differences. So one, from abundance you go to scarcity, and from human needs you go to endless needs. And this puts a lot of pressure obviously on the planet, puts a lot of pressure on all systems. And it also creates what we call a linear economy, because the idea of the linear economy is that you take resources, you make products, and you dispose of them. Take, make, waste. That's linear. So there's a beginning and there's an end to it. And because of this simplification, this idea that resources are scarce, and this idea that we have to produce and we have to consume more, you see, look at the images. You see pollution. Pollution is not into the equation. You see, that's the second image. The third image, you see people that are treated as machines, as instruments in this whole rat race, because they have to produce more and more, which leads to burnouts, which leads to stress. Underneath that, you see the unofficial landfill near Piscadera, where people just dump their waste because they don't know what else to do with it. You see the official landfill in Malpais. It's not much different from the other one. And finally, in the corner, you see that this linear economy has been severely affected also by COVID. We tend to look at economy as only GDP and profit maximization for companies. So for companies, it's about maximizing profit, and for countries as a whole, it's about maximizing production and consumption value. And we define it in a metric which we call GDP. Now, even though we have been focusing on GDP forever, we haven't managed to make GDP grow in Curaçao. And this was also the case before COVID. COVID has only accentuated this. So we have created all kinds of work that during COVID turned out weren't vital. So we can call them bullshit jobs. We haven't managed to reach our goal within the linear economy, which is GDP growth. And we have also created pollution and left people behind. So it's time to change this system. Back to you.
Yeah, and a new economy is possible. Please go to the next slide. I will show you why this new economy is possible. The new economy is possible because if we can create an economy that does not just waste, does not just dispose of all the values, of all the things, of all the human needs that we've created, but finds its way back into the system, then we can manage to create a system in which it is regenerative. So not only is it regenerative into our soil, so not only are we throwing less stuff away, it is also regenerative in the way we collaborate with each other, because things do not just end. We just don't go to a supermarket to buy stuff and then it's done, because when we throw something away or discard of something, it goes to somebody else who can do something with it. So you're transmitting the value that you already used to somebody else that can regenerate value altogether again. So that is what the circular economy does. If we can go to the next slide, I can show you the whole scale of circular economy needs. The needs of the circular economy works on a scale of what we call the R strategies. These are R strategies that on the low side you can see is about recovering waste and to transmit that waste into energy. On the highest level of a circular economy, you actually rethink and redesign, and maybe in some cases you refuse certain products because they have certain very toxic elements to it. So when you do this, you are investing. Oh, there's a problem with the remote there. So when we actually work on an economy like this, we're investing in value and maintaining value. Again, it's about changing and diversifying an economy in such a way that the value it generates can allow for people not to go to a 9-to-5 job. So employment is not going to something that people feel forced to go to, but something that aligns with their purpose in life, something that they feel they're inclined to do to improve the benefit of society, to generate value to all, and to contribute to the general well-being of the people they live around. And again, if you generate all these little bits, pieces of a system, you create a more collaborative system. So instead of saying, no, we centralize a system to one whole and all capital flows to one certain point, we're saying, no, we're going to open up the system, we're going to collaborate in the system, and we're going to regenerate the system constantly, because only if we talk and work together, we can constantly regenerate and create new values. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you, Juan Carlos. And I'm a big fan of circular economy systems. What we need to do now is also look at the foundation of a circular economy and apply that on our social and our economical and our political systems. And that's why, for me personally, the donut economy model was just amazing to discover. This British economist called Kate Raworth introduced this model a couple of years ago. It's based on 7 principles. I'll tell you more about them in a second. And you can see the model at the left-hand side. We're just talking about the linear economy, so that's a line of representing endless growth, GDP growth, profit maximization. Now you see the circular form of the circular economy in the donut, and it consists basically of 3 elements. You see the green lines. You see the social foundation. That's basically it rests on the pillars that we need as humans to be to live a thriving life, to live peacefully and prosperously. So that's water and food and income and education. And if there's not enough of these elements, then we have a shortfall of that, and that means that people cannot live a good life. On the other side, you see the environmental ceiling. These are the environmental factors that we have to take into account while designing our new economy. So that's climate change and freshwater use and biodiversity loss. If we put too much pressure on our environment, then we have an overshoot. So in between these 2 frontiers or limits, that's where you find a safe and just space for humanity, and that's where the donut is. So instead of focusing on endless growth and limitless growth, you focus on balancing between our needs as human beings and what our environment can cope with. Now, just quickly to look at the 7 principles. First of all, aim to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planets. Instead of just looking at your own company, at your own country, at your own organization, look at all people, look at all living creatures, and how what you do influences them, and vice versa. Secondly, see the big picture. We were just talking about oikonomia, oikos, nomos, management of a household. There are parts of the economy that are not taken into account in our current system. We only look at production and consumption. The households, for instance, they represent a lot of value that is not taken into account in our economic systems. If you look at the reproductive economy, especially here in Curaçao, we care for one another and we take care of each other. And most of the time that's in the family setting or this voluntary work, which is not valued and which is not taken into account when measuring the value of our production and consumption. Same goes for the commons, whether it be our history, our oceans, our air, our community gardens. There's so many commons on our island as well. They also represent a huge value. But mostly we look at the market. That's also a very important factor, obviously, more regulated than you would think. And there's the state. The state plays a huge role also when it comes to facilitating these new initiatives. Third, nurture human nature. In our old economic systems, we always assumed that there is some sort of super rational human being, the Homo economicus. He was always a man, and that's the way it went. And this man was only looking after his own interests, his self-interest. He was fully rational, and he took decisions all by himself. This is not the case. There was no room for friendship or love or altruism in these old systems and models. Even though we see in real life, even today, that people tend to collaborate, they tend to look after one another, look at open source software, look at voluntary work, look at this initiative, for instance, which also consists of voluntary work so far. So you must promote diversity, participation, collaboration, etc. Fourth, think in systems. We're not thinking in ideas of a line anymore. We're thinking in systems where we experiment, where we try things out, where we try to look for quick fills or quick results, where we adapt and look for continuous improvement. Fifth, we have to be distributive. Very important factor as well. We create value and then we share it with everybody who created it, instead of just having a small percentage profit from the work of all the others. Sixth, like you just said, Juan Carlos, be regenerative. So work with the living world instead of against the living world. Be a sharer, a repairer, a regenerator. And seventh, last but not least, aim to thrive rather than to grow. We're not against growth, we're agnostic about growth. If you look at low-income countries like Curacao, obviously there are aspects of our economy that do need to grow, but take into account that we have to relatively decouple this growth from our resource use. If our economy grows, then we have to make sure that the growth of the economy is higher than the growth of our resource use, and at the same time eliminate poverty. There have to be conditions attached to the idea of growth in order to make it work in the long run. Back to you.
Yeah, that's right. Can we go to the next slide? So this is how the initiative started, the Curaçao Donut Economy. It started in the middle of the COVID crisis. I guess maybe I should give back the word to you because you're the one who started it, right?
You're right about that.
So maybe I shouldn't take that away from you.
No, it's interesting. We're just talking about synchronicity. So in March, when the whole crisis started, I've read the book of Kate. I'm an economist myself. I was very interested in this initiative, and I thought it was a great moment to find like-minded people to work on this and to make it a reality for Curaçao.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I found out that you, Juan Carlos, were working on this very same idea in Amsterdam. As a matter of fact, you had already made sure that it would be implemented as policy in the municipality of Amsterdam. So that was very inspiring to hear. We were looking for people in Curaçao, also people living in the Netherlands who have affinity or were born and raised here or just love the island to participate. So now we have a group of people from all walks of life that represent companies, that represent the government, knowledge institutions, visionaries, alchemists, innovators, all ages, and we have one thing in common, and that's the love for Curaçao and the love for a sustainable future for us all. So that's what we're working on right now.
Yeah, and what we'd like to do now in the next part, next slide please, is to actually show you how we go to look at different policies and to evaluate whether the policy is impacting certain parts of our society. So as we see here, when we're talking about agriculture, we see an increase in agricultural systems on Curaçao at this moment, a lot of very wonderful initiatives, and all these initiatives have certain impacts that affect the donut, certain aspects of the donut in a certain way. So to be aware of that is also to be aware about the decision-making processes that you're putting into place in the future. So let's say agriculture creates jobs. It is also teaching people and bringing people more in touch to nature. So you could say it's education also. It's teaching people how to understand the grounds that we're using for food. It is at the same time on the ecological side, we are changing nature, right? Because we are using nature as a consumption space. But in order to do that, we have to think about that because you do not want to take too much of it, but you want to create in a regenerative way that it is not decreasing your biodiversity loss. The same goes for the cycles of phosphorus and nitrogen. These are necessary to make your grounds a bit more fertile. We need to take these things into account so we understand what we're dealing with in the economy. Next slide, please. Another example is, for example, technology. We also see that Curaçao is a very technological island, right? We've been technological ever since the coming of the refinery. We have a lot of institutions working on technology. And even nowadays, we have initiatives that are very cutting edge, that are working with blockchain technology and doing a lot of things that are very important for the economy. But at the same time, you see that it generates a lot of jobs. Again, jobs is very important in this. And at the same time, learning to work with these technologies gives us an educational advantage, develops our knowledge institutions, makes us a knowledge society again. On the recurring end, you can see also that blockchain also consumes energy, right? So blockchain takes a lot of time to process information, and that might be consumptive of your energy. And if you even look at the outer realm of the donut, you can see that it also might need spaces for data saving. So you can say that data centers might take space on Curaçao. How are we going to think of that? Are we going to put them in the deep blue sea? But if we're putting it in the deep blue sea, is it affecting our corals? So this is how the donut works. So you can use it as a compass for decision making. You can actually use these dots to pinpoint where the lines of relationships are in projects that we're developing to see where we're heading in the future. Back to you, maybe for the next slide.
Yes.
And because we're very active in the next slide, I would like to jump it off. We're working with tourism. We already heard a bit about Saquito. from the example of the minister. It would be great if the people that are looking at the presentation right now put the dots on the donut for us. So see how the development of Sakito is impacting the future, sustainable future that we're heading towards. How does it create jobs? How does it provide social equity? How does it build for resilience? Does it do we gain incomes from this? And how is that working? Does it affect, do the cruise ships produce a lot of CO2? So in that sense, climate waste. Is it biodiversity loss or biodiversity gain? So think about these questions, and I'm very inclined to hear what your thoughts are during the discussions round.
Let us know. This is an exercise really to start thinking holistically about the challenges that we're facing as an island. And that's what you get from the donuts. So instead of just focusing on one aspect, which was mainly profit maximization like we just spoke about, look at all the elements and how they interrelate, and see if they're aligned with the philosophy behind the donut to make sure that you're taking the right decisions while deciding whether or not to jump onto projects in the future.
Yes. Thank you.
Last but not least, people want to join us, please do. We are an organic bottom-up movement, working together obviously with the Ministry of Economic Development, working with the University of Curaçao, and other fantastic entities on this beautiful island. Join us, send us an email, follow us on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram. Let us know who you are, and we'll be more than happy to have you on board, because we need everybody to make this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cinco años pasados, el mundo va de acuerdo con la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible, que concentrar una cantidad de 17 metas para el desarrollo sostenible. La agenda te encerra un plan de acción dirigido a gente, planeta, prosperidad y paz que se quiere realizar a través de colaboración entre partes. La misión es mejorar la calidad de vida y transformar el mundo sin la ningún gente que atrás. O apenas tocante con nos, abo y ami, que laga el mundo aquí atrás para futuras generaciones, bo a llegar de punto de mes uno no está para actualmente, y cuatro acciones que nos Mr. Toma ainda para lograr realizar y meter para el desarrollo sostenible del año 2030. La primera edición de Curaçao SDG Action Week está bochas para compartir la idea na riba implementación de meter para el desarrollo sostenible na Curaçao. Join el evento virtual aquí de 28 de septiembre para 2 de octubre 2020. Para registrar of más información, visita nuestro website www.curaçao2030.cv of Facebook SDG Curaçao 2030. 5 años pasados, el mundo va de acuerdo con la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible, que concentrar una cantidad de 17 metas para el desarrollo sostenible. La agenda te encerra un plan de acción dirigido a gente, planeta, prosperidad y paz que se quiere realizar a través de colaboración entre partes. La misión es mejorar la calidad de vida y transformar el mundo sin la ningún gente que atrás. O apenas tocante con nos, abo y ami, que laga el mundo aquí atrás para futuras generaciones, bo a llegar de punto de mes uno no está para actualmente, y cuatro acciones que nos Mr. Toma ainda para lograr realizar y meter para el desarrollo sostenible del año 2030. La primera edición de Curaçao SDG Action Week está bochas para compartir la idea na riba implementación de meter para el desarrollo sostenible na Curaçao. Join el evento virtual aquí de 28 de septiembre para 2 de octubre 2020. Para registrar of más información, visita nuestro website www.curaçao2030.cv of Facebook SDG Curaçao 2030.
Yes. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos and Yuri, for your elaborate presentation about Curacao donut economy, designing a thriving nation. I don't know about you, but I was very excited. And maybe you could have seen my picture also in the platform of the DCE, because I'm also a true believer that furthermore, our economy to be more sustainable, we should engage into new ways of doing things and doing the economy. So they emphasized also on giving a good life to our people. As the minister said, the final goal is for better lives, and they also emphasized on giving a good life, a better life for our people. The Curacao donut economy is a more holistic approach. It's not aimed on a linear economy like you saw, no take, make, and waste mentality, but a mentality where we go from linear to circular, building up economies through systems where we use waste to create energy, reuse, recycle, invest in maintaining value of humans and things. So no more old ways, say bye to the old ways, no more pollution, exclusion from people, and only focusing on endless and limitless growth, but more balanced growth of the economy, where the needs of the people and environment are also taken into place. I love also that focusing on the new jobs we are aiming to. The minister said that we want to create 15,000 more jobs. It should also be more purposeful jobs, as the Yuri and Carlos has stated. Jobs where people, in terms of the future of work, will also have more meanings. We'll see how they will be more in terms of the natural development of Curacao and maintaining all the heritage and the natural and inheritance we have also of the country. Like you saw, one of the sectors that would be very interesting in this regard is agriculture. So agriculture should have another meaning, another focus in terms of the circular economy. There will be a lot more that we can do using innovation, and this is also very exciting for us to take into account as new sectors to be developed for our economy. So thank you once again. And now we enter the section of the question and answer, where a lot of you participants that already are bearing with us from 4 o'clock, listening to all the great presentations that has been given in this session. Now you have also the chance to ask questions about things that you want to know, or more elaboration on the presentation that has been given. We have received a couple of presentations. We have also received questions for the minister, but also for Yuri and Goilo, Juan Carlos Goilo. I will start with a question for the Minister of Economic Development. Let me see if they are ready. The panel is ready, I think. Yes? I'm not seeing them yet. But I will start mentioning the first question. It says, how will we in Curacao recover without a significant financial injection in order to help those more vulnerable? So this is the question for the Minister of Economic Development. How will we in Curacao recover without a significant financial injection in order to help those more vulnerable?
Significant financial injection to support jobs for people that work for employer, also support jobs for entrepreneurs. So that is one part of the significant financial injection that we need. A second part will be the economic recovery fund that will need capital injections for business retention and business development. So indeed, there also we will need a significant financial injection. And the instruments that we want to use for business retention and business development are guarantees, and those guarantees can be given to banks, but also to equity players and investors. And by doing so, we can create a lot of leverage to make capital available within our country. So I agree that we need a significant capital or financial injection to recover from our crisis.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much, Minister Martina. Indeed, in the presentation, it was stated that the part of the fund is very important. The enabler in getting an Invest Curaçao is very important, so that we would have all the different types of funds that is needed for the recovery. There was also a question, Minister Martina, about how will we retrain citizens to be able to participate in a more stable workforce that it isn't directly connected to tourism. So they're asking how will we be giving training and retraining and courses for people to getting into other types of jobs and workforce that is not directly connected to tourism?
Well, that is by developing our sectors. I've shown a slide with the several sectors. So tourism is one of them, but it's not only tourism. In the maritime industry, there are lots of jobs. In the energy transition that we are looking towards, a lot of jobs will become available. I'm talking about not only the refinery, but all the areas surrounding the refinery. There are at present what we call the living lab, which is going to use those locations to come up with energy transition pilot projects that we can implement on Curaçao and then be a showcase for the world, actually. So that is also one part, to be innovative and create jobs in the energy sector. Then we have what we call entrepreneurship and innovation. That's yet another area where we do a lot of support, training through our Mitigation platform. And then another sector which I didn't mention too much about it, but which is a very, very important sector for export, is what we call science, technology, and innovation. So that is also what we promote, because, so to say, information technology services can be done in Curaçao, but not necessarily for the clients in Curaçao, but for the clients internationally in the world. And those are the areas that we are promoting through strategies, but also to programs to promote the creation of economic activity in those areas, and as a result, jobs in those areas.
Yes, very clear, Mr. Martina. So in developing different sectors, the need for the development of the human capital will also go aligned. We will be emphasizing in trainings and courses to keep up also with what's needed in the workforce on these sectors. Very, very interesting. I have another question for Yuri and Juan Carlos in terms of the donut economy. How will the donut economy task force involve the people, entrepreneurs, NGOs, and other groups in the movement? How will this be done?
Thank you. Well, we have different ways to involve people. One of them is we are working on a campaign where we let the public know what we're working on right now. This is done through videos of participants. We work on a digital platform for all stakeholders where people can sign up, where they can show what they're working on, where they can find projects, where investors can see what projects are aligned with the donut economy concept and model. We also have a form for people who want to apply to be a part of the movement, so they know what we represent and what they can expect from us. We have regular meetings also, physical and also obviously, of course, virtual meetings as well, where we discuss the progress. We have different projects within the donut team, so where we focus on, for instance, policy analysis, project analysis, funding, the creative campaign side, and also very important aspect, the island snapshot, which is a snapshot to see where we are right now when it comes to the elements we've just discussed during our talk, and what steps to be taken in order to reach the goals within the totality of SDG within the next couple of years. So there are different ways for people to participate. They can always send us an email so they can get the form and follow us on social media, so we know exactly how they would like to help and what their specialty is, so we can make good use of their knowledge and their energy.
Yes, so the train of the donut economy is already on the move. It's just important for people that want to enjoy the movement to jump on board. So do you have at this moment the information of the website, Facebook page, or other information that maybe it's interesting to send out for them to start registering as of now?
Yes, what they can do, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. The names of our accounts on these social media platforms is just Curaçao Donut Economy. Donut is the English spelling, so DOUGHNUT, to be in line with Kate Rayworth and her philosophy, obviously. So this is where you can find us. Drop us a line, let us know who you are, and we'll send you the form for application. And from there on, you'll be part of the team, and you will be on the donut train.
Yes, thank you, Yuri. There's also another question about the donut. Which steps Curaçao will take in order to achieve and implement the circular economy? Is there already a strategy, a plan laid out on what are the steps to be taken?
Yeah, maybe I can answer that. I think so. The first step that we can and have to take is to find out all the aspects of our economy that have potential for the circular economy. So the coming few months, like Yuri already explained, we will be doing sessions, both virtual and physical. We'll try to organize this the best way we can and let people know as soon as possible. And by doing these sessions, we can acquire information and understand more about the human needs. And at the same time, we're also in great collaboration with the Central Bureau of Statistics of Curaçao to find out about all the information available for the development of insights, and also to understand better what is our ecological limits, but also our capacities, and at the same time also understand better via statistics what our challenges are on the social and economic level. So we're very much gathering a lot of information in this first phase. This information gathering phase will produce the snap, what Yuri also already mentioned, and with that also a list of all the projects and initiatives that passed by us, so we immediately know what are the projects that we need to invest in the coming years. And with these insights and also this list, we go back to the Minister of Economic Development, and we hand it over so that he knows which projects and which themes are important for the economy of Curaçao to enter into the donut, but also to become a more circular economy.
Yeah, so the project group has yet started with this action. So in due time, we'll be informing more about the steps and the strategies that will be undertaken in terms of the circular economy. I have a question for Minister Martina. It's about the circular economy, but they want to know about the minister's opinion. How is the minister planning to engage stakeholders to come along with the donut economy movement for Curaçao? So how is minister planning in engaging all stakeholders in this movement?
Well, that has been presented today through the presentations of today to join this movement. But circular economy is a philosophy. Everything what you do, you can put in the circular dimensions into what you're doing. For example, if we are building new hotels, we can put in circular concepts, how to treat wastewater, how to treat waste, how to treat, for example, making use of solar panels and all of those sustainable type of appliances. So circular economy is something that it's a philosophical thing that we can implement in several projects that we are doing right now. But furthermore, like Juan Carlos said, through promoting this model that has been presented today, we will create more traction for people to think in a circular way as well. Like we are doing with the circular economy, we have done the same by promoting the orange economy as well. When we were promoting the orange economy, there the focus was on creativity, on innovation, on things things like that. As Mayo, what you can expect of us, that we will participate in several events, but also organize several events, workshops to make circular economy thinking part of the mindset how we are doing things.
Yes, yes, thank you, Minister. I believe the Minister has already taken a step into implementing the project bureau for the circular economy. So circular economy is on the agenda. And like the Minister said, it will be combined with other developments so that we can have more sustainable developments in order to implement our projects. There's another question for the Minister. It has to have some relations to the first question, but maybe you can still answer it also. What are the building blocks for a nationwide engagement of the people and stakeholders of Curaçao in creating a fusion between the traditional GDP economy and the donut economy? So how you bring this together? Minister just answered a little about that already. I don't know if the Minister wants to say something more about the approach of the linear economy that is more traditional GDP in relations to the donut economy and how these two will come together?
Yes, well, like you just have said, Suleika, we have formalized a donut economy, a circular economy working group, a project structure with a steering committee, a project group, and from there, specific actions will be organized. So by, let me use the word, institutionalizing circular economy ideas through this steering committee and project group, actually that's the way to create a fusion into what we are doing currently and how the circular economy can be an integral part of that.
Yes, very good. And as the Minister said, there are stimulus on the way. We have investment planning for recovery, and certainly projects that are more aimed towards circular economy will also be part of the investment agenda, right?
Very good that you said that. For example, we have areas that we would like to develop, and we have shown the RIF area and the Sekito area and some other areas. So if we are going to create visions how to develop those areas at inception, by creating the vision, circular economy's ideas will be part of that, will be an integral part of that. So basically everything what we are doing moving forward, circular economy philosophies, ideas will be part of the development in terms of visions, and then in terms of the programs thereof, and then in terms of execution thereof.
Very good, very good. I have a question for Yuri or for Juan Carlos. Which areas does the donut economy platform see as a priority to start?
I can answer that. I think you always think of basic human needs when you start. Obviously, the donut is broader than just that because we also focus on the ecological ceiling, like we just explained. But a good example, like we also mentioned in our talk, is food, specifically agriculture. Why? Because food is the basis of everything, is the basis of life. And also because we see that there are a lot of initiatives in Curaçao happening right now that are already aligned with the donut philosophy. And that's something that I really want to underline, that this is not a utopian project or idea. This is something that is really happening already. And what we're trying to do is give it a tangible framework to make it more objective and and make it more actionable. And because we are seeing that these initiatives are already taking place, there's already a lot of energy on this island. If you just look at agriculture, whether it is syntropic agroforestry, hydroponics, aquaponics, vertical farming, there's a lot of innovation.
Maybe I can also.
Yes, maybe maybe Juan Carlos can finish it.
Yes, so I think so. What we've presented 7 principles of the donut economy to meet the needs of all within the needs of the living planet. That is one of the foundational aspects of the donut, right? So having a holistic view is very important in this. An economy and GDP and the finance and the investment, but it also the value of the people and the value of the place in which you live. So if we can find a way, like I said, it's very important to sit down with each other to figure out what are the important parts of the economy. Then we can start to tease out certain projects that are not aimed at one sector, because if you have this holistic perspective, then you already thought out implementing a project that has an impact on various aspects of the donut. So by saying we're only generating jobs in a certain sector is by definition something that the circular economy will not do, because let's say we take agriculture, like I just explained before, it taps into the educational realm. So how does it tap into that, and what does education need for education to understand agriculture a bit better? It taps into our geological cycles, the way our years are organized for us to harvest, but also to create systems that are regenerative and do not pollute the grounds that we are harvesting on. So in other words, there's a lot of science being done. There's a lot of knowledge being generated. You can also see that the agriculture produces certain forms of compost or maybe even bio-waste, biomass that can be used to produce other products. Like, for example, you can use the bio-waste for biofuel. So you can see that if I could start talking about just one sector, it is too limiting for the circular economy vision, the holistic perspective that we try to look into. So it has many aspects, and just to name one sector would be not part of the principles of the donut.
Yes. Thank you, Juan Carlos, for elaborating on one of the sectors, because that gives a very good perspective on all the entrepreneurship possibilities on one sector, in this regard, agriculture. But there are a lot other more sectors where you can also implement the philosophy and the ideas of the circular economy. So I think, as I'm seeing, we have a last question that people are getting very excited about the idea of the donut economy and the donut model. So the last question is also for Yuri or for Juan Carlos, and it says, how can we increase awareness on the benefits of the donut model? So people are getting excited on what it can mean for the sustainable development of Curaçao. What can we do? How can we create more awareness on the benefits of this model?
Maybe I should jump in, because I see that Yuri is figuring some things out.
Yes, go ahead.
Go to our pages, follow us, like us, and also react to our pages, so we know that you're out there. We are setting up a form as we speak, and we're going to send this out the latest this week to everyone who reacts to us by the end of this week. And this form will allow us to figure out which parts of this donut initiative you can be part of, and you can contribute to directly. And then that could mean engagement, gathering people to join the movement, or it could also be helping us out with the policy analysis of different projects or different researches that are being done. It could be different other activities. So please fill out this form by the end of the week. And next to that, I would like to say that we are going to organize these open sessions in which we are going to explicitly tackle certain aspects of our policies that we're developing right now, especially in this moment in time in which we're dealing with a lot of hardship and a lot of difficult times for a lot of people. So we're going to these topics within the donut and to see how these topics affect certain aspects of life, so we can think about solutions and generate projects that will help Curaçao's economy to thrive. So that is what we will do. So please join us for this very awesome journey. And so go to our websites, like, follow us. And if you're really engaged to be part of the organization itself, send us a message. Otherwise, wait for our invitations to be activated and to send us an invitation. Spread it. Sharing is caring.
Yes, so in due time, the Circular Economy Platform, the Project Bureau, they will be reaching out, what I'm hearing, reaching out, so you can be able to miss it when it's there. So when it's out there, just jump on and engage in participation, so you can also be part of this movement, right?
Yes, everybody.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if Yuri have something to add, or no, still having problems with your audio. We can't hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, right now. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I just wanted to say that everybody can join. We talked about regenerative, inclusive, distributive. That also goes for our own platform. Everybody who wants to join can join. You don't have to be an economist or have specific knowledge that has to do with economic models. People who are actually working out in the field are more than welcome. Everybody who wants a better future for Curaçao can help us out. Because the thing is, we're doing this for the first time. We want to become the first island donut economy. This has been implemented already in some cities, such as Amsterdam, we just mentioned, but Curaçao has a unique opportunity to become, again, a pioneer, like Juan Carlos said at the start of the speech, to become a pioneer when it comes to an economic transition on a worldwide scale. So we need everybody to join us.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, because that gives really the inspiration for people to also see the more added value that going in terms of the circular economy can mean for Curaçao. Minister of Economic Development, Mr. Martina, I don't know if you have some final words.
Well, some final words. I would like to thank the organization for a tremendous job. Very, very well done. Thank you. We enjoyed being here. I do hope what we have brought forward, that is of inspiration. Curaçao has a tremendous potential. And with all of these innovative ideas, circular economy, etc., we will get out of this crisis. And in the end, we will thrive to create more jobs, better jobs, and ultimately better lives in a sustainable way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Martina. Thank you, Yuri Oudheten, and thank you, Juan Carlos Goylo, for your presentation and the answers given to our people. We are very glad that you had stayed with us through this session. Like you're saying, we are thinking of designing and thriving a new nation. It has been said, the inspiration and the achievement will be better lives, good lives. So jump on the train of the circular economy. But as the minister said, in terms of recovery, we will be looking at new balance and economic development where we can create decent jobs, where we can have sustainable economic growth. Like the SDG 8 has stated, and Curaçao will also be able to achieve all the targets on this area. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us. And we hope you have had a lot of time to get the information you needed and engage with us after this through the Facebook of the Ministry of Economic Development or other platforms that have been mentioned, so we can continue to hear about the direction we're going. Thank you very much. I'm Zuleika Mook, and it was a pleasure for me to moderate this section. Bye.